Most people have never heard of Dragon Quest, and the ones who have never stopped talking about it. This video is my attempt to explain why, but this isn't a history lesson or a list of games. I'm just going to show you by breaking down the specific moments, the specific people, the specific ideas that make Dragon Quest the most quietly extraordinary RPG series ever made. If you've never played a single game, by the end of this you'll definitely want to, and if you've already played them, by the end of this you'll want to play them again. So without further ado, the best place to begin this story is not with the heroes or villains, it's in those places in between that most of you wouldn't ever think of. The towns. Now, why do towns matter? It's the importance of peace, a sense of community and belonging, being with loved ones and simply living your life. That's what's happening here. Dragon Quest understands tension can only be built where conflict leaves the biggest impact, so it takes time to build its emotional weight not in the cutscenes or boss fights, but instead in the quiet corners of the world that most players would not expect. And to prove this, let's dive into the richest moments in the series where the unlikely corners do all the heavy lifting. Imagine a town where you grew up ever since you were a child. Your father dies in front of your eyes and you're kidnapped into slavery for the next 10 years. You return to your hometown, only to find it completely in ruins. Everyone you knew, all dead except one old man who remembers you and your father. And he had to live through the horrors of that fateful day. And around the world, you are constantly reminded of your hometown's destruction, and its events put fear in villagers across the country. Some of the soldiers who were ordered to wreak havoc on that town suffer from PTSD of that day, and they can't sleep at night. Then later in the story, you travel to the past and see the very last moment before your life fell apart, and the game restricts you to only the boundaries of that very same town. You associate this memory with peace so strongly because it was the final day you were with your father, alive and happy. But you know it's in the past, knowing that in reality it's still in ruins, but you still don't want to leave. This town lived its own life and you're reminded that it was more than just a town, it was your last happy memory. Now you've come of age and discover you're a luminary fated to save the world. You set off on your grand adventure to inform the nearby king of your existence, only to be arrested on sight. After a jailbreak you return home and find strange things. You find yourself but younger, and your grandpa who you thought to be dead was there. And after him giving you some inspiring words, you walk back home and you glitch in between the past and present. Your hometown is utterly in ruins. Your adopted mother, your childhood best friend, and everyone you knew in your life is gone. Some of the villagers manage to escape, and they spend the course of the entire game rebuilding their hometown because this is their home. Their lives were ruined because of a mad king, and during the game, these people are utterly depressed. Some are traumatized by what had happened, some can't speak a word, they merely sit where their home used to be. The towns carry weight across the story and their absence is felt dramatically. Cobblestone and Wheelbrook are perfect examples of this because they are locations that are supposed to feel like a place to go home to. Dragon Quest is not forgiving in the traditional sense. It's created around the expectation that you will find the small pieces of dialogue in these towns which actually expand the world building and very often foreshadow locations and story events. It rewards your patience and care for these people, showing you that taking time away from the main plot for just a few seconds here and there rewards you. These NPCs fluidly react to everything around you. Sometimes what they say doesn't make sense, until 20 hours later where that confusion now in the back of your mind suddenly pops up and you realise that the world and rich locations is a real world with information flooding in and out. You just didn't know that certain context. Dragon Quest creates a world that is truly believable, and no other RPG leans so heavily into the belief that the story is a part of the world, rather than the world being a part of the story, and so it embraces the world in order to carry the weight of the story. Across your life you encounter all kinds of people, but those closest to you are the ones which shape you. Yuji Horii understands how important this is, so when it comes to deciding companions to give you along your journey, he doesn't necessarily give you traditional companions. He gives you other people, full people who suffer the paradox of being restricted as a side character, but they have stories which are so densely layered that they don't feel like side characters. They feel like the protagonist of their own stories, except it's your story, not theirs. And to prove this point, let's search deep into 3 examples across the series with the most complex and layered side characters.
Morning, darling!
Sylvando Norberto comes in during the first act of Dragon Quest XI, and defines himself strongly as a flamboyant, dedicated, charming and endearing fruity man. At this point in the story, all the new companions have been very seriously motivated, except Sylvando. He acts like nothing in the world bothers him. It's all fun and games, butterflies and rainbows. He runs the travelling circus that's currently in Gallopolis. Nobody in the right mind would take him with conviction after this introduction. But this is where you should never doubt Yuji Horii. He has the longest running character arc in the entire game. We begin to see he's more than just a performer. The Prince of Gallopolis is cowardly and he tries to prove himself in a national horse race, except the prince was too scared, so the hero becomes a stunt double and Sylvando was also entered in the race. Once you win on behalf of the prince, Sylvando goes to congratulate the prince and realises the coward he really is. Sylvando lectures the prince on chivalry and how to do the right thing, giving oddly specific insight from someone who's just a performer. And further on, he helps track down and capture a massive sand crab and hands it over to the prince so he can claim glory. We begin to see Sylvando is selfless in its most literal sense. He enjoys putting a smile on people's faces, even if it's royalty or a regular person. He just wants to bring joy to people's lives through his carnival antics, but also on a personal level. But he also respects honesty. He forces the prince to come clean to his father because it's the right thing to do. Sylvando's introduction in Dragon Quest XI was the best out of all of the companions because of his conviction to do the right thing, and doing it so elegantly. A lot happens between now and my next point, which I won't spoil here, I'll save that for another video. But later on, Sylvando shares a deeply touching storyline of estrangement, acceptance and reconciliation with his father. Sylvando is the son of a legendary swordmaster. He was trained to inherit his father's mantle as a knight. However, one day when Sylvando saw a travelling circus, he realised his true dream was to bring joy to the world as an entertainer, which sparked tension between the father and son, and Sylvando abandoned his wealthy home, vowing to never return until he succeeded in making the world smile. And for a very long time, he never spoke to his father again. But when the two finally reunited in Act 2, Sylvando is nervous and can hardly speak, and his father expressed the deepest disappointment for who he has become. Naturally, as the player, you assume this rejection is due to his flamboyant lifestyle and unmasculine nature. However, it's not. It's purely because Sylvando has failed in his dreams. He has not yet fulfilled his vow to make everyone smile. He embraces his son's path and views his pursuit of joy as its own form of noble chivalry. By the end of the game, he is my favourite fruitcake, and he's my favourite character in the whole game. And he's restricted as being just your companion. Dragon Quest hands you Sylvando disguised as a comic relief character, just to blindside you so you feel the full weight of his story later on. It is a crime we never got a Sylvando spin-off. We got an Eric spin-off out of everyone. I hate Eric.
From someone important to you, right? Your mother or something?
Princess Medea is a character who's deliberately pushed aside to the back of your mind to act as someone who's almost living in your subconscious. There's one moment I fondly remember in Dragon Quest VIII that changes everything we were supposed to know about Medea. Medea's been with you the entire game, cursed in the body of a white horse. You've known Princess Medea ever since you were taken into the kingdom as a child, and now you can't even talk to her. She's nothing more than a background presence along your journey. She's never even said a word, she's just there. But this absence is by design. Around the halfway point, she drinks from a magical spring that's said to cure all curses, and before your very eyes, she turns back into her human form. Only her curse was a bit too strong and she reverted back to a horse. However, the spring changed something. Now every night at the inn, she appears in your dreams speaking to you as a princess. The only time in the game where you can connect with her personally, where she discusses who she is, her feelings, the weight she's carried over the whole journey. She recalls spending her childhood with you and was going to promote you as her palace guard just so she could spend more time with you. She shares her deep affection for you and frets about her anxiety regarding her arranged marriage, and most of all, the sadness she faces being trapped in her cursed state. The community typically argues that she is underdeveloped and she has a little screen time, but that's what makes these dream sequences so special. You're awake most of the day and only a small portion of your sleep do you actually dream. Yet a lot of psychology tells us that when you have repeated dreams over and over, it's your subconscious trying to tell you something. But the hero only dreams of Medea. Something I don't understand in the fandom is why people choose to marry Jessica over Medea. Jessica is a very layered and complex character, but she's also just the hero's friend. There's nothing romantic there, at least to me, other than what you make up in your own head. Jessica is designed to be a platonic companion, but Medea is built to have an intentional romantic connection. Psychology proves this. Her story is unique to anything I've ever seen in an RPG before, a character's development which is solely driven by a dream. This direction turns a casual background character into a wondering thought at the back of your mind for the rest of your journey. Suddenly, every night you're reminded that you're doing this for her.
I'm so white as a horse.
Now, a lot of you are going to like this one. Dragon Quest IV takes its own spin on expressing companions. You play one chapter as someone else entirely and live their story, then the next chapter as someone else. And that keeps going until chapter 5, where you finally play as the hero and all the other characters meet up together as your companions. This is a very rare form of storytelling that gives you emotional attachment to characters before the story truly begins. This would never happen in this generation. People have come accustomed to having an entire catalogue of shows on Netflix at the touch of their finger. This instant gratification rots your ability to wait and let things flourish. Dragon Quest IV refuses to allow this. It delays that gratification by forcing you to experience every side character's life and slowly set up the world and narrative before you actually play as the protagonist. And the result was a cast of characters you truly care about. Dragon Quest IV perfected waiting. And if you'd like to see a video on this, let me know, because I have a lot more to say on this topic. Every RPG can give you side characters, but Dragon Quest gives you people with lives who you can feel truly existed before you boot up the game. And this is important because at the end of every Dragon Quest game, you don't just remember the bosses or the epic finales or the story plot twists. You remember the people with you. And not a single game in this series does it ever forget that. There are things in life we don't realise we've lost until it's gone. It's not always a person, sometimes it's a version of you or a period in your life. Sometimes it's time with someone you love that you just assumed you'd always have more time with. Losing something never likes to announce itself. It just happens. And sometimes you only feel it when you look back and realise it's already past. Dragon Quest understands this and uses it against you in a way not many RPGs dare to attempt. Because the most devastating moments of a story are not always when something ends, it's when you look at what's lost. Imagine this for a moment. You've just gotten married. You have twins, you have a little boy and a little girl, and on the same day that they're born, your wife gets kidnapped, and while tracking her down you get cursed into a life of stone by a man that's been haunting your dreams ever since you were a child. You're not killed here, you're cursed in the most literal and painful sense, emotionally. You're conscious, you're aware, you're unable to speak, unable to do anything but exist inside of your own paralysis. And Dragon Quest V does something special here. It makes the character watch and makes you watch. Days blur into months and seasons pass by. You don't know if your children are even alive, you don't even know if they were told you existed, and the game never lets you forget that there's two children growing up without a mother and father, children who needed someone to guide them the way your father Pancras once guided you, and you don't even know if anybody is there for them. The parallels in this scene earns its place as the most nuanced expression of loss in any game I've ever played, because you've already lived this pain. As a child, you watched your father die in front of your eyes by the same man who inflicted this curse upon you. You spent your childhood parentless. You know exactly what your children are feeling right now because you already experienced it yourself, and you're helpless to do anything. Dragon Quest V cuts this even deeper by forcing you to watch the life of another boy. The only concept of time available to both the player and the character is watching a newborn baby grow up every day living his life with loving parents, reminding you what you've lost. This one scene carries 3 simultaneous losses without saying anything about it. The loss of time from your own life, years you will never get back, knowing you've already spent 10 years as a slave, and now this. The loss your children are living through, growing up without the one thing you wanted to give them, a parent who stays. And the loss that was never resolved with your own mother and father. Your mother was kidnapped at the night of your birth, the same way your wife's been kidnapped. Your whole quest is to find your mother. Your father died in this search so you could live, whose absence shaped everything you became and whose absence you're accidentally recreating for your own children. You're watching history repeat itself. Dragon Quest V doesn't need to explicitly say this, it doesn't even need dialogue. It just puts you in a block of stone and trusts that you feel the weight of several layers of trauma every second as you watch. If I had to choose one scene to define emotional storytelling in this entire series, this is it. You could argue the themes behind loss are vast and filled with nuance, and you're right. Loss could imply histories of people with stories you might never truly understand. Dragon Quest IX expresses a grounded side of loss and obsession that many of its players can relate to, but it doesn't show it happening, it forces you to watch the consequences of a broken promise. Long ago in a small town called Zir, a young boy and girl fell in love. Petra and Mason. Mason had a dream of learning the art of stone carving and left to follow his dream, promising Petra he would return in just 5 years' time. Except time had escaped him as he threw himself into his work. Petra waited 10 years and eventually accepted that Mason was never coming back, and feeling abandoned and betrayed, she married someone else. When Mason found out, he was heartbroken. He truly loved Petra, and through his pain, he developed an unhealthy obsession with the life he should have had. Now, as a broken man, he travelled to the peak of the heights of loneliness, and using his stone carving skills, he carved a replica of the entire town of Zir, calling it Rock Zir. An exact replica of a town he remembered in tribute to all that he had lost. The entire town due to its smallest detail, including the people. The only house in Rock Zir that could actually be entered is Petra's house, who now in Zir lives in that very same house remembering Mason after a long marriage with her new husband. Mason stayed in Rock Zir to live among his creations, eventually dying of a broken heart. The town is left empty, with nothing except a talking slime who embodies the spirit of Mason, living in Petra's house, the way Mason wished he could. This storyline may only be an hour or two long in Dragon Quest IX, but it acts as a stepping stone of a Celestian exploring the world to help people through their traumas, and it silently expresses one of the strongest emotional side stories in the series, focusing on the very human emotion of love and obsession. Dragon Quest also expresses its most emotional and human moments not in the main narrative, but in the small stories that make this world worth exploring. There are tragedies in life that no amount of effort, resources, or time can undo. You can do everything right, you can arrive with a cure, you can have the power to fix everything, and yet you can still find out you're too late. Some losses are simply permanent. Dragon Quest VII is a game about time travel, and it uses that premise to tell a story where time travel changes nothing, where the hero arrives with a legendary cure and watches it fail, because sometimes the darkness of reality cannot be undone by magic. It's one of the cruelest things in this series. The village of Regenstein was desperate and about to die. A prolonged drought had pushed an entire community to the edge of survival, so they prayed and prayed and prayed for rain. The demon Rainiac arrived disguised as a savior, and instead of rain, he unleashed the Grey Rain, cursed rain that instantly petrified every living being, every man, woman, child, and animals frozen mid-action in just grey stone. In just moments, an entire community became a graveyard of statues, and their final terrified moments are preserved forever. One man had been away from the village when the rain fell. Clemens. He returned to find everyone he had ever known turned to stone. He learned of the cure, but he couldn't retrieve it alone. So he waited and waited. He lived among the statues for 50 years as an old man refusing to abandon the people he loved. But 50 years of wind, rain, and harsh weather had been working against him. The outdoor statues had chipped and cracked and eroded. Their physical forms were compromised beyond repair. When your party finally arrives from the future, the cure works, the curse lifts, and it changes nothing. Because you cannot piece together what time has already destroyed. This is a game about time travel that cannot undo what time has done. A young boy named Felix had been playing underneath the hideout when the rain fell, so he was shielded from 50 years of erosion by the stone and earth. The angel tears restored him completely. He wakes up as a child in a world where everyone he knows is dust. The game frames his survival not like a blessing, but as its own form of loss. He is displaced out of time, alive in a world that has no place for him. And then Clemens, the sole keeper of an entire community's memory, decides to adopt Felix and spends the rest of his life walking the world, warning strangers about Rainiac, because without him, that community is forgotten forever. He doesn't carry the memory of Regenstein out of heroism, he carries it because if he doesn't, nobody will. And what makes the story structurally devastating, Clemens reaching your party isn't a coincidence. His 50 years of mourning is the direct reason you learn about Rainiac in time to save the next town. Regenstein's tragedy is the sacrifice that prevents the next tragedy. It's proof that some tragedies don't ever get resolved. They just get remembered less and less until the stone itself erodes. Dragon Quest VII uses geology as a metaphor for mortality. The statues don't just represent the dead, they represent how time strips identity from those lost, how grief erodes, how memory fades. Their fates were set in stone the moment Rainiac arrived, and stone, given enough time, eventually becomes dust. Across 3 entirely different games, Dragon Quest portrays 3 kinds of loss. A man frozen in stone watching the years pass and his children grow up without him. A man who carved an entire town from stone to preserve a life he never got to live. And a village turned to stone by the very rain they prayed for, eroding slowly into nothing over 50 years. Dragon Quest didn't choose stone by accident. Stone is permanence. Stone is what remains when everything living has gone. And across 40 years and 11 games, this series has returned to that image again and again to show you what loss actually looks like, and all that's left is silence. Every other RPG will show you loss through a cutscene or dramatic high-stakes moment, but Dragon Quest shows you a block of stone and lets you uncover the nuance and mystery behind it. These moments are set in stone, and so are the feelings that they leave behind. There is a kind of person you meet in life who says very little. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's weight, and you feel it more than you would feel any words. Dragon Quest has always understood this. For 40 years its heroes have said nothing, and in that silence, the series found something most RPGs spend thousands of lines of dialogue chasing. The feeling that you're not watching someone else's story, you are living your own story. In 1986, there were no cutscenes, no voice acting, no dramatic camera angles to tell you how to feel. There was a world, a threat, and you. The hero of Dragon Quest I said nothing because there was nothing to say. You weren't following a protagonist, you were the protagonist. Every step toward the Dragon Lord was your steps. Every clue pieced together in the dark world was yours. The silence wasn't a design limitation, it was the entire point. In a game with no cinematic language to guide the emotion, the silence became where your imagination lived. That made piecing together the world's clues and defeating the Dragon Lord feel unlike anything else available in gaming at the time. because you didn't watch the hero win, you won. Dragon Quest I introduced a concept that other RPGs started to abandon over time, but Dragon Quest would spend the next 40 years perfecting it. Dragon Quest V is where the silent protagonist stops being a design philosophy and becomes a storytelling weapon. The hero of DQ5 watches his father die and says nothing. He spends 10 years as a slave and says nothing. He watches propaganda spread across the world, corrupting kingdoms and manipulating people too desperate or too frightened to question what they're being told. He observes the politics of the world being quietly poisoned from within and says nothing. It's that quiet stoicism in the face of immense and compounding trauma. If you've ever read Berserk, imagine Guts, but he speaks even less than he already does. But in DQ5, it's because he never speaks. You never feel like you're watching someone else process that trauma. You process it yourself. His grief becomes your grief. His helplessness becomes your helplessness. His determination to keep going in spite of everything, that becomes yours too. And then you get married. You have children, you're turned to stone, and the silence deepens into something almost unbearable. Because a silent protagonist experiencing loss is not a character losing something, it's you losing something. The story is so emotionally human, so grounded in the universal experiences of life. The story was designed to be relatable, and it was designed for you to implant yourself into this tragic character. In fact, the single time you do actually speak is during the time travel sequence. As a kid, you see your older self speak. And as an adult, you see your younger self speak. And the only words spoken the entire game is a promise to never give up no matter what happens. Dragon Quest V didn't just use the silent protagonist well, it found the exact conditions under which silence becomes more powerful than anything a character could ever say. I love this game so much. And then Dragon Quest VIII did something quietly revolutionary. For the first time, the hero reacts with profound expression, high quality animation that shows personality, discomfort, warmth, emotion. He interacts with Yangus and Trode, not through dialogue but through his presence. The way he stands, the way he reacts, and the way his expressions during high tension makes him feel truly powerful and capable, all without saying a single word. He feels like an active participant in his own story, rather than an observer standing slightly outside it. Dragon Quest VIII proved that silence and personality are not opposites, that a hero can say nothing and still feel like someone you know. Across these three heroes are three expressions of the same idea. One introduced the concept and made you feel like the protagonist for the very first time. One mastered it and made you feel like the story was happening to you personally, and one perfected it visually, proving that silence and personality are not mutually exclusive. Dragon Quest's heroes say nothing, and in 40 years of saying nothing, they have made you feel more than most characters with 1,000 lines of dialogue ever could. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from understanding someone who's done something unforgivable, where you sit with the uncomfortable truth that if you lived their life and saw what they saw, lost what they lost, and experienced their trauma, you might have made the same choices. That moral discomfort is one of the hardest things fiction can make you feel. Dragon Quest doesn't only write villains to be defeated, it writes tragic villains to be understood. And in understanding them, it forces you to confront something that not many RPGs ever ask of you. To see that line between hero and monster, which is not drawn by nature, but by personal circumstance. Sorrow the Manslayer is introduced as one of the most feared beings in the world, a ruthless butcher committed to the genocide of a human race. On paper, he's a villain, but peek around the mask of hatred, and you see nothing but a broken, distraught man who's witnessed humankind's most horrific acts. Sorrow is half human, half monster, and he carries that internal conflict his entire life. He doesn't belong to any particular race. From childhood, he chose to embrace monsterkind for a sense of belonging. He understood their vulnerability. He built a sanctuary at Rose Hill to protect creatures that humans hunted, exploited, and abused. To the monsters he protected, he was not a manslayer. He was a savior. But his hatred for humanity was not born from nothing. He watched humans commit their worst sins repeatedly: greed, cruelty, violence, and the act that pushed him over the edge was seeing humans who relentlessly hunted his lover, Rose, seeking to exploit her powers. She was hunted like an animal by the species he already resented. He was being pushed over the edge, and his response to this madness was genocide. His hatred may be real and justified, but his actions are not. That gap between justified feeling and unjustified action is where sorrow lives and where Dragon Quest IV puts you between. But the cruelest ironic twist is not what the humans did to Rose, it's what one of his own did to her. His most trusted monster betrayed him and orchestrated Rose's death to deliberately push Sorrow's sanity beyond recovery. His naivety and his rigid belief that monsters were inherently good just because humans were evil became the weapon that was used against him. When Rose dies, Sorrow loses himself entirely. He uses the secret of evolution to transform his body, literally becoming the monster the world always said he was. It is one of the most powerful metaphors in the entire series. He doesn't just lose his mind, he loses his memories and his humanity. In Dragon Quest IV's DS remake, this goes further. It adds a final chapter that lets you play as Sorrow himself. The party resurrects Rose and attempts to convince Sorrow to abandon his genocidal crusade, and in a shocking twist, Sorrow actually learns the truth of who killed her. He understands it, and for the first time, he shows genuine remorse for his actions. And because of this, he joins your party to help fight the true mastermind behind Rose's death and who manipulated him into madness. Sorrow commits unforgivable acts driven by love so consuming he collapses into blind obsession. He is a character defined by the cycle of hatred. This is what happens when justified pain is never given a healthy outlet, and instead it hardens into some weird, twisted, dark ideology. Dragon Quest IV tries to make you understand how he got past this cycle of hatred and broke free of his clouded moral clarity, showing his personal growth as he decides whether the humans he despised are as innocent as the heroes he's actually following. Sorrow was born half monster and he became a monster, but what if the monster was born an angel that was sworn to protect the world? Because in Dragon Quest IX, we witness one of the most heartbreaking downfalls in gaming. Unlike Sorrow, Corvus didn't have malice in his heart from a young age. He started with pure, unconditional love that was his duty to protect humans. A truly tragic villain requires an honourable soul that is systematically broken by the world. Corvus is the ultimate tragic villain because he's not inherently born evil by nature. His morals were forcefully mutated as he lost his capacity to love deeply, and his absolute dedication to duty took over, but that duty became twisted. Centuries ago, Corvus was a Celestian guardian protecting the human village of Wormwood Creek. He fell in love with a mortal woman named Serena. Out of pure devotion to her, he broke the ancient Celestian rule. But when the tyrannical Gittish Empire attacked them, fear took over. And in order to save Corvus from a very honourable act of suicide in battle, Serena gave him a sleeping potion. But the terrified villagers used his unconscious body as a bargaining chip, handing him over to the enemy to save their own lives. For 300 years, Corvus was tortured in absolute darkness, shattering his heart and mind. Of course, he was without context. Serena's act of love looked like the ultimate betrayal, and to make matters worse, his Celestian race never came to rescue him. 3 centuries of agony turned his love into something with an equal power yet a completely opposite force. He got absolute world-ending hatred. Not in the name of power or domination, he just wanted to erase the pain of the universe that he felt lied to him. It was his duty to protect the world, and his twisted solution was to erase all that was in the world in order to protect it from the very same pain he felt. And now this brings us to the ultimate comparison. Sorrow the Manslayer from Dragon Quest IV or Corvus from Dragon Quest IX. Both are legendary tragic figures driven to genocide by the loss of a woman they loved. But while Sorrow is a tragic victim of external human cruelty, Corvus's tragedy cuts much deeper. Sorrow knew that Rose loved him until her final breath, but Corvus spent 3 centuries believing the person he loved most had sold him out. Corvus only finds peace when Serena's spirit reveals the truth. His villainy is vindicated by the devastating realization that he was actually loved all along, and that is what makes him the most tragic villain in Dragon Quest history. Most RPGs take themselves very seriously, sometimes too serious. Dragon Quest does this whilst not forgetting how to enjoy itself. It's got those high stakes, those epic battles and world-changing events and a really good story, and then it makes you play as a shopkeeper for 5 hours. Dragon Quest understands something most RPGs don't, that the world only feels real when it has space for embracing the silliness of life. You're on YouTube right now watching a video about a game turning 40. When you look at the grand scope of life and history of mankind, that's pretty silly. So Dragon Quest takes time to show you these people doing real things they enjoy. Sometimes it's opening a shop, or sometimes it's becoming a gambling addict. Sometimes it's eating the goddamn cheese! The whimsy in Dragon Quest's main games is proof that the world exists beyond much more than just the hero story. Torneko Taloon in Dragon Quest IV spends an entire chapter trading weapons until he becomes mega unga bunga rich. He has no special powers with no destiny, he's just a man with ambition to support his family, and he's one of the most beloved characters in the entire series. My video about him blew up bigger than I could ever imagine. That's proof of how much he is loved. The casino exists in almost every Dragon Quest game, and I'm one of those suckers that fell for it. I've spent hours in casinos, especially in Dragon Quest XI. At one point, you actually enter the Dark World version of a casino where the chances were much higher of winning. Like the idiot I am, I spent 2 whole hours here gambling and I got racked up so many tokens. I was so excited, I was falling for it, only to advance the story and realize that the tokens mean absolutely nothing. The game entices you and turns you into a joke. Not all the casinos are like this, it's just the Dark World one, because fuck you, that's why. The casinos also have a monster arena that you can enter and another one where you place bets on monsters fighting to see which ones survive. And all of these games have random mini medals that should mean nothing, but it turns them into a super rare currency that one clinically obsessive dude will collect no matter what, like he wants to become a Pokemon champion. He will catch them all. These aren't distractions from the world, they are the world, and the cherry on top is that lovely Puff Puff.
What the hell?
When the world is built with that much room for joy, it's only natural the endearing nature just spills over. Torneko gets its own trilogy of roguelike dungeon crawlers, which are filled with charm. The weakest monster in the whole series gets his own unique trilogy of spin-off games called Mori Mori Rocket Slime. Dragon Quest builders took this entire series and turned it into Minecraft, except better. Like, for real, I would die on that hill, it's better than Minecraft. These spin-offs did not feel forced or a cash grab because the whimsy was always there, and that whimsy is what allowed for these silly ideas to grow. Dragon Quest's whimsy is not a side feature, it is intentional, and in Dragon Quest V, after you break free from slavery, the very first town you go to, it's a casino town. If you was a slave for 10 years, wouldn't the first thing you want to do is enjoy yourself? This is proof that Yuji Horii understands the most believable worlds are the ones where everything isn't serious. It's the ones where you can take a break and enjoy yourself. Take a look at any cover of Dragon Quest. You will immediately know what kind of game it is. That's a fantasy adventure game. It is joyfully fantasy. Dragon Quest knows exactly how to make you feel the fantasy the moment you start playing it, through something very, very specific. Its names, the dialects, the puns, the world that reflects the real world, they represent this whimsy in ways that the player can instantly recognize, and they do this through meticulously perfecting localization. When I first played Dragon Quest, I did not know this, but I felt the whimsy in a way I struggled to explain. The first thing that grabbed me was Toriyama's art, the second thing was everything else. The earliest Dragon Quest games used Elizabethan English throughout. Thee, thou, dos, hath.
Doth mother know you weareth her drapes?
Then everything changed when all of the accents arrived. Dragon Quest VIII's cast is a masterclass in localization research. The series changed completely due to its success. Yangus. The Cotswold dialects of Cobblestone in Dragon Quest XI is so accurate that people who grew up there, me, hear it and feel something personal. Every location in these games are designed to feel personal to a real culture, Yangus, and then there's the puns. Dragon Quest's pun game is relentless and completely sincere. It refuses traditional fantasy spells and instead uses punchy and iconic onomatopoeia to mimic the sounds of the spells. Spells like sizz, sizzle, kassiz, bang, boom, kaboom, whoosh, swoosh, swoosh, crack, crackle, crack, 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 crackle, snooze, zoom, zing, cock-a-doodle-doo. The towns called Sniffelheim, Coffinwell, Yangus, All Trades Abbey, Nottingham, Helmenaptra, Gittish Empire, Nom Nom. Even Regenstein is German for rainstone. It's brilliant. Then the monster names like Cleopatra, Cruelcumber, Lips, Dumking, Sham Hatwitch, Crabadabadoo, Serial Quiller, Robin Hood, Dr. Agon, Crystalinda, Prince Princeton and Princess Princessa, Tweedledeef and Tweedledoom. Every single name is telling you exactly what something is while making you smile at the same time. The localization team extended Dragon Quest in the best ways. Some are extremely random and nobody asked for them. For example, Gopher and Coburg from Dragon Quest V. Google Sax, Coburg and Gopher, and you will see how obscure and wildly intelligent these games are. They take Horii's world and ask themselves, how do we make this feel real and what would it feel like if it was real? And then they did exactly that. A lot of Horii's original vision already resembled the real life cultures. The localization just extended it further than anyone expected. Dragon Quest doesn't just present a fantasy world, it commits to one so completely that it becomes the final boss of fantasy. Dragon Quest localization doesn't just translate a Japanese game for a Western audience, it makes Western audiences feel like the game was made specifically for them. And when you hear your own dialect in a fantasy world, when a spell name makes you laugh and then immediately makes sense, when a town tells you everything about its history before you've even spoken to a single person, that is a localization team that understands Horii's core philosophy completely. The world is real because the people in it are real, and the words they use are the proof. It's a very difficult thing to explain in such a short amount of time, so if you want to dive more into localization, my first ever video on this channel was diving into the mind-blowing localization of Dragon Quest Swords, and this video revealed some big brain, high-level IQ type of shit that blew me away. When most people mention world building in games, they usually just mean the lore. The fandom's filled with encyclopedias and endless wiki pages worth of lore. Dragon Quest likes to do something different. It builds worlds in the way real worlds are built, physically, across generations. The original 3 Dragon Quest games share one world, not thematically, I mean literally, and the way that the world expands across each game is brilliant. It recontextualizes everything each time and is one of the most ambitious acts of world building in the history of RPGs. All of this was at a time where stories in a video game was nothing more than an afterthought. The world of Dragon Quest I is called Alifgard. It's a large continent where you are the only hero on a quest to save the world as the mighty Erdrick once did. Yet the world feels complete because you are alone and there are more locations than one single silent hero needs. Eventually, you save the princess and defeat the Dragon Lord. The hero leaves with her to start his own kingdom in a new land called Torland. The world didn't end at the credits of the game, it began to expand even wider. 100 years later in Dragon Quest II, you play as the descendant of that same hero. The world of Torland encompasses the entire continent of Alifgard, but now there are 3 kingdoms directly descended from the original hero, Midenhall, Moonbrook and Cannock. Dragon Quest II isn't just a sequel, it inherits the world and bloodline of Dragon Quest I. And then to end the trilogy, Dragon Quest III has an entirely new map, the real world. Cultures and geography directly inspired by our real Earth. And then comes the twist. Once the evil Baramos is defeated, you learn that he is not the ultimate evil you believed he was. Secretly pulling the strings from the underworld is Zoma. As you descend to the underworld to face him and put an end to his terror, suddenly you're taken to Alifgard, and you as the player recognizes this world as the world of Dragon Quest I, with all the same locations, but once Zoma is defeated, you're gifted the title of Erdrick, solidifying this game was a prequel the whole time and tying together all 3 games through its bloodline and the world over the course of hundreds of years. Throughout this entire video, I've been trying to subliminally show you how Dragon Quest builds its world emotionally, in the typical sense you describe world building to someone. Every moment I've mentioned in this video is how you describe world building in the metaphorical sense, the construction of a world that feels so human you believe it. But Dragon Quest I, II and III reminds you that the foundation was literal too. This was one world that was built across 3 games expanded over generations, each entry inheriting it from the last. I guess my whole point with this video, put extremely simply, Dragon Quest doesn't just tell stories set in a world, it tells a world that the story is a part of, and it builds those worlds the same way stories build you. Every element that makes Dragon Quest feel like Dragon Quest was shaped by people working against expectation. Yuji Horii has a core philosophy drilled into every single director who has ever worked under him. Dragon Quest is not about the story, it's about the experience. What do you want the player to feel? That's why Dragon Quest V doesn't feel like a story, it feels like your life. He injects this invisible philosophy through all 11 games. Originally, Koichi Sugiyama was asked to write rock music for a medieval game. That wasn't the smartest choice, but he pushed back and argued for a classical, adventurous and cinematic type. Thankfully, he won. Imagine if this was the theme to Dragon Quest. The overture we've all come to love was a melody that he admitted he wrote in 5 minutes, and it nearly never existed. Akira Toriyama publicly stated if he'd known that Dragon Quest would go on so long, he would have politely declined. He didn't know what an RPG was and his editor pushed him into it despite not wanting to take the job at first. He didn't hate the series like some people have claimed, but he has said that he found creating such a large cast of characters who are so variable in design to be stressful and difficult. I love Dragon Ball, but everyone does look pretty similar. However, he couldn't do this in Dragon Quest, which is what caused him to retroactively look back on his career and say he would have rather declined. The entire visual identity and art of 40 years of Dragon Quest came from one of the biggest manga creators in the world who didn't actually want the job. And then Koichi Nakamura built the entire game engine for Dragon Quest 1 through to 5 with the developers Chunsoft. Then they quietly walked away after DQ5. He wanted to explore his own creative opportunities, which led him to creating the Mystery Dungeon games, and then looped back to Dragon Quest anyway with the Tornado games. But every game from Dragon Quest VI onwards ran following Nakamura's footsteps. Heartbeat stepped in for 6 and 7. Level 5 changed everything in 8 and 9, turning them into genuinely special 3D stories. Square Enix themselves took over for 10, 11, and soon to be 12. Different teams across different eras with different technology, and yet every single one of them feels like Dragon Quest. Well, that's all because of Armor Project, who has been involved with every single Dragon Quest game. That company is owned by the creator of Dragon Quest, Yuji Horii. This one man's voice saturated an entire world so completely that when new studios took over, the feeling had already become the series' DNA, and he's still there now at 72 years old to guide the new generation on how to create a truly great Dragon Quest game. He built something so rich and deep that 6 different development teams across 40 years couldn't shake it loose. He's not just managing the franchise, he is the author of everything. Dragon Quest is his child, and a child that he loves so dearly. The main series alone could fill a lifetime of gaming, and the spin-offs could fill another. There's something for everyone in Dragon Quest, and let me prove it one last time. Every mainline game shines in its own specific way. Dragon Quest I gave you a lone hero in a large world, inventing the genre we love. Dragon Quest II expanded that world and shattered the isolation, forging the definition of companions. Dragon Quest III twisted that world and revealed you were living in a legend the whole time. Dragon Quest IV forced you to fall in love with the lives of a wide cast before you ever met the hero. Dragon Quest V gave you a lifetime of grief, pain, loss, parenthood, and the importance of legacy. Dragon Quest VI ripped you apart, making you wander across a dream world as you search for the ghost of who you used to be. Dragon Quest VII gave you an empty ocean and the ability to rebuild forgotten history. Dragon Quest VIII turned an intimate fairy tale into a cinematic, vast, and lively journey. Dragon Quest IX stripped you of your angelic divinity, showed you the pain in the world and how to protect ordinary, everyday lives. Dragon Quest X built a world so vast and beautiful, people crossed a language barrier just to translate the game themselves and do what Square Enix won't. Dragon Quest XI gave an entirely new generation their first core memory, myself included, and Dragon Quest XII. Let's see what fateful flames they have in store for us. You'll notice I haven't mentioned Dragon Quest X in this video. That's because it has 8 versions, all of them the length of a full RPG. That game has enough content to last a lifetime. And if you want to know which game to start with, I ranked every single one of them from best to worst in my last video. That's the best place for you to find your entry point into the series. Dragon Quest is the best-selling RPG franchise in Japanese history. Its cultural relevancy rivals even Pokemon, and I know that's hard to believe. New releases caused traffic accidents. They had to be restricted to weekend launches because people were skipping work and school just to buy these games, and Square Enix still follows the same rule. The overture played during the 2020 Olympics. Any Hunter x Hunter fans would be salty because the manga's inconsistency over the years was very partly due to Dragon Quest. It was never officially confirmed, but the assistant staff said that Yoshiro Tagoshi would conveniently call in sick the very same week a Dragon Quest game released. This happened on multiple occasions. He's playing Dragon Quest V in this famous photo. Dragon Quest shook and keeps shaking every corner of Japan. And in the West, almost nobody knows it. I asked my friends once and they said, I think I've heard of it. And honestly, that's because Dragon Quest never chased the West. At least not properly. It never compromised its identity to appeal to a broader market. Watch this video to learn about the controversies of the Western history of Dragon Quest, specifically the Zenithian trilogy. But now, the West is finally getting these gems. Dragon Quest trusted that the people who needed its games would find it eventually on their own, and they did. They always did, and now they continue to do so. Every year someone plays their first Dragon Quest game, and becomes the kind of person who never stops talking about it. Hopefully, I've turned you into one of those people. This video started with a simple observation. Most people have never heard of Dragon Quest. The ones who have never stopped talking about it. I am one of those people, and after everything we've covered today, I hope you understand why. And right now, in 2026, it is the greatest time in history to be a Dragon Quest fan. We have so much to look back on, and so much anticipation for the future that's looking bright. Dragon Quest doesn't try to be the biggest or loudest or the most spectacular. It tries to make you feel something true. Something that I can only describe as something human. If you know someone who needs to get into Dragon Quest, send them this video to convince them. It's the perfect time to begin Dragon Quest, and if you did enjoy it, share it with other Dragon Quest fans. This channel is dedicated to Dragon Quest, and I'm aiming to build a wonderful community here. The more the merrier. Make sure to subscribe because I have so many videos on Dragon Quest and lots of topics planned this year. I also recommend checking out some of them, like this full cinematic retelling of Dragon Quest V. Across 3 hours I miss no detail and fuse the full story and world building into one flowing narrative completely narrated by myself like it's a fantasy book. If you liked this video, you'll like that.